So hello and welcome. We are happy you could join us today. We have a large group to talk about how they succeeded in pushing through and deploying reliable and safe software. So we're going to get into that. But before that, let's make some introductions. I hope you're all having a spectacular day. I'm your host, Charles Collegy, the security analyst for Accelerated Strategies Group. And today's Security Boulevard webinar is brought to you by Armory. And as I mentioned, we have a great group of experts. We have Jeff Barr, Chief Evangelist at AWS, Cody Powell, Senior Engineering Manager at Snap, and Thomas McGonigal, Cloud Partner Solutions Architect at Armory. And as I mentioned, they're going to have a conversation on the environment that makes it possible for Snap's 1,000 engineers to reliably and safely deploy software. Now, they are eager to discuss their software deployment, solutions, and successes. However, I need to delay that just a few moments. So guys, you're just going to have to wait a few more minutes as I have some housekeeping items to take care of first. I want to let you all know this webinar is being recorded. So later today, it will be available on demand. And you will receive an email with the link, but at any time, you can go to securityboulevard.com and gain access to this webinar on demand along with all of our archived on-demand webinars. So feel free to take a look at anything that is there and that's available that can help you as we move forward. So now, a few comments about the big marker platform we use. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the chat button. This feature allows everyone online to communicate with us. Right? We want feedback. We want comments. We want this to be a discussion, not just a monologue. So feel free to jump in and make some comments about what you're hearing, and can maybe drive some of the discussion, especially as a panel today. And I'll be monitoring it along with everyone else. But for questions, if you have questions that you would like answered, please don't use the chat. They can be entered into the Q&A tab, so we know exactly where they are when it comes time for the Q&A session at the end. Now, we're going to try to answer as many of your submitted questions, either during the discussions or as time permits in the Q&A. But if they're not all answered, I'm sure that Armory will follow up with you. Lastly, you'll see a handouts button. That's to the far right there. And in here, you can download additional information, including today's slide deck. Now, I'm sure all of you may or may not be aware that at the end of today's webinar, we'll be awarding 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stay with us till the end to see if you are selected. So now it's time for today's session with Jeff, Cody, and Thomas. And as Thomas is our panel moderator, I'm going to pass the gavel on to you. So Thomas, good luck, and I'll be listening and gaining some insight myself.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here today. And boy, I can't express how excited I am to have Cody and Jeff here today and have a fireside chat on reliable software deployments. First off, we're going to introduce ourselves. And so I'm Thomas McGonigal. I'm a Cloud Partner Solutions Architect, as Charles mentioned, at Armory. And my first guest is Jeff Barr, and he's the Chief Evangelist at AWS. And he's a vice president there. And I'm going to let him take over and introduce himself. But Jeff, before I let you introduce yourself, I did have an icebreaker question. I was curious what your definition of reliability is.
All right. Well, happy to be here, Thomas. And to me, reliability is just all about keeping things running so you can deliver whatever functions and benefits that you want to offer to your customers.
Great definition. And so up next is Cody Powell, and he's from Snap. He's a senior engineering manager. And same question to you, Cody. What is your definition of reliability?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I think my definition of reliability would be consistent execution across a set of known factors. These would be things like availability, low latency, durability, and throughput. And basically, you want to execute against a budget on each one of those. You don't want to push everything to the global maximum because that's super expensive. But just consistent and predictable performance across each one of those dimensions. That equates to reliability for me.
Well, another great answer. Thank you, Cody. For anyone who missed our teaser trailer for this fireside chat, in it, I asked Cody a very, very pointed question, and it was, what was the hardest thing about moving from a monolithic services to a microservice architecture? And he had a great answer, and I just look forward to everyone hearing about this. Go ahead, Cody. Could you answer that question once again, please?
Yeah, definitely. I think one really hard part of shifting to microservices is that you're also shifting towards service ownership at a large scale. So you are distributing the responsibility for running things really well to lots of people who never had to worry about this before. So all of a sudden, they're accountable for reliability or cost efficiency, for a lot of things they never really had to worry about because the monolith handled it all. And that comes as a surprise to a lot of people. And I found that it's a lot easier to try and standardize this at a platform level that provides a lot of leverage on these problems, rather than go to a zillion different service owners and say, hey, could you please run reliable software? Turns out that's really hard to make that effective.
No, what a great answer, Cody. Thank you very much. Jeff, are you seeing anything around this topic in your travels?
Well, I don't get to travel anymore, but I still get to speak to lots and lots and lots of customers. And I think, as Cody says, it's when companies talk about going to microservices, it isn't simply about, well, let's break the code up into a bunch of pieces. It's also the distributing the responsibility, and it's saying, let's make sure that the way that we like to do it at Amazon is we actually like to align the microservices and the teams that have to conceive of, build, own, run, scale, and evolve them. And we call these two pizza teams because we like to keep the team small enough that the two arbitrarily sized pizzas should be able to feed these somewhat arbitrarily hungry developers and team members. But the basic idea is, if there's a microservice, there should be basically a one-to-one mapping of, here's the service, here's the team that runs it. And this means that instead of this monolith and not a lot of kind of clear ownership, it's really clear who owns it, who's going to make it happen. And we found that as we go to customers and they say, yep, we want to take our own monoliths and turn them into modern, scalable, easy to innovate microservices, a lot of it isn't, this is what you do to the code. It's like, this is what you do to your org chart and to your dev teams. And that's sometimes a harder message to receive than let's just refactor and change all the code.
Wow. So what I'm hearing from both of you is it really comes down to a people problem. And I have a colleague that was calling it the triangle of truth, but people, process, and technology is the triangle of truth. And you both kind of zeroed in on the people aspect of it. I think that's absolutely fascinating. If you don't mind, Cody, would you mind presenting the deployment reliability and agility at Snap slide deck that you presented in our previous thing? I think it would set up the rest of our talk today.
Yeah, sure thing. I can walk through these. It's a short set of slides. And for any questions that you have, just drop them in the chat window. All right. So over the past few years, Snap has evolved our cloud infrastructure from a monolith to microservices, kind of like we alluded to at the beginning of the talk. So initially, we had a single monolithic Google App Engine backend that contained essentially all Snapchat endpoints. So every single request that the Snapchat mobile client made was going to this App Engine app. It was in a single region in the middle of the United States. So if you were a Snapchat user in Indonesia or something, you were making round-trip calls to the middle of the US for login and sending messages and posting to your stories. And because it was a monolith, the operations and the development experience were all centralized. It was one size fits all. You had no ability to tailor this based on your own team's preferences. So over the past few years, we've made this conscious effort to shift away from that. And today, the Snapchat backend is powered by hundreds of microservices all running on Kubernetes. So we're deployed across multiple clouds, multiple regions to shorten those round trips for our customers. And as part of this shift to service-oriented architecture, our service owners are now accountable for availability, reliability, and cost. At the same time that we've made this push towards distributed service ownership, we've tried to centralize as much of the development experience and the management via our own service mesh platform. So today, what our infrastructure looks like is basically, we depend broadly on Kubernetes for things like compute, application, sidecar management, scaling, disruption budgets, all this kind of stuff is handled really well at the Kubernetes level, where we lean most heavily on EKS from Amazon. Our data plane is all standardized via Envoy, the open source reverse proxy from Lyft. So we rely on Envoy for load balancing, for traffic shifting, observability, and consistent enforcement of authentication and authorization. All of this is orchestrated via an in-house control plane that we call Switchboard. So Switchboard gives us kind of this overlay view of our entire infrastructure. So you can see all the services, all the underlying Kubernetes clusters, your deployment pipelines, your routes, security policies, all that kind of stuff. And then ultimately, we rely on Spinnaker for deployment orchestration and safe rollouts. So that's true for both the container with the services business logic. It's also true for a lot of the common containers that we rely on in this Kubernetes architecture, like Envoy, other things for logs and metrics. So early on in this whole architectural evolution, we wanted to centralize deployments on Spinnaker for security, observability, and because it checked the box on essentially all of the functional requirements we had on software rollouts. And as the infrastructure team, we wanted to run Spinnaker ourselves and have service owners create their own pipelines. To facilitate that, we created docs and reference pipelines, Q&A sessions, all kinds of stuff. And we thought, all right, we're good. Y'all are in good hands. You've got it from here. However, we saw that as microservices grew in popularity, outages increased too. And after a particularly bad quarter, I went back through all the postmortems, I categorized them, and I saw that the number one cause of these incidents was bad deployments. And they weren't like subtly bad deployments. They were just like broken software that we had deployed. Like we broke an API contract, or there's a clear logical error, or we're throwing new exceptions. And so we did a bit of root causing on what was going on here. And we found first that a lot of engineers were getting lost in the Spinnaker UI. And service owners, they weren't really that interested in adhering strictly to best practices. They just wanted a working pipeline and then to get on with the rest of their job. And as a result, we found that a lot of these pipelines, they didn't follow basic best practices like a canary rollout on new changes. So from that, we realized, okay, a standardized deployment tool alone is not enough. We need a lot more than that. We want some consistent and guaranteed semantics like canary and phased rollout on all deployments. We want a simplified UI, so you don't need to be a world-class Spinnaker expert to deploy your software. And then we also want some basic leverage and standardization across our pipelines. We should be able to say something like, hey, for all multi-region pipelines, go to AP Southeast 1 before you roll out to EU West 1. And so we called this deployment pivot Mesh CI/CD. And the major technical shifts here were, first, we wanted seamless integration with our in-house CI tooling. We wanted that complete pipeline stamped out during service creation, so you didn't have to think about how your software was built, where the artifacts were published to, and then how it was deployed. We wanted very simple, declarative, and standardized pipelines that are all managed in code via Git-based workflows. Not only does that make it super clear who's doing what from a deployment perspective, but it's very easy to find working examples across other teams without having to spelunk through UIs. And then finally, we wanted a lightweight deployment UI to simplify pipeline reporting. Like I described earlier, we've got that switchboard tool, that's our single pane of glass for our infrastructure. Deployment should be a part of that instead of having to jump into the Spinnaker UI. Now, under the hood, Mesh CI/CD is still powered via Spinnaker. We were very lucky here to get some expert scaling and development support from Armory. AWS pointed us towards Armory in the early days of our pivot towards multi-cloud as a standardized, piece of software that they had seen work for a lot of companies like Snap, like these cloud native companies. And I'd say that partnership has really paid off. Now, I wanted to show a quick peek at what Mesh CI/CD actually looks like. And I realize that's hard to communicate via slides, so I tried to pick the simplest examples possible. But basically, we want like these very simple declarative pipelines. So, with a pipeline definition, basically it looks like Python. You specify what the pipeline name is, what the application name is, and then you lay out these declarative steps where we're going to deploy to our Gamma environment, US East 1, Canary rollout. And then if that's successful, we're going to go to the next phase of our Gamma environment, which is complete rollout of US East 1. And basically, it's just being able to chain these things together in a declarative and clear way, where these primitives, like deploy step, are defined by us as the platform team. And as a service owner, you're just consuming this, and you're composing your pipelines from these very basic steps. And then you get a very simplified deployment history showing who deployed what and when. So you can see this shows whether a deployment was kicked off by our CI system, whether it was an ad hoc deployment by an engineer, did it go to staging, did it go to production, what artifacts, what was the hydrated manifest that was deployed, and a basic sort of pipeline view here that shows when different changes started and when they stopped. And we found that just simplifying all this has really eliminated a lot of the sharp edges from some of the core open source tooling. Okay, so where are we at today? So today, Spinnaker at Snap executes tens of thousands of pipelines per month. We've got hundreds of services that are all relying on this and core Snapchat features like messaging and Discover feed, all kinds of things are all taking this heavy dependency on Spinnaker. Our opinionated deployment product built on Spinnaker, Mesh CI/CD is our dominant deployment model. And most importantly, deployment-related outages have become a rarity. So when we do have an issue these days, it points to a need for richer semantics, not a basic gap like, oh, this pipeline doesn't have Canary deployment instrumented. And I would say that's really helped turn the tide. That allows us to go a lot deeper into the more valuable findings that we can gate our rollouts on, as opposed to just like your deployment basics are missing. And that's it in a nutshell. If all of this sounded interesting to you, we're hiring. We'd love to find people who can solve these challenges at scale. So you can find out more information at careers.snap.com. And that's it for the presentation.
Thank you, Cody. Boy, that was such an interesting presentation on so many different levels. And I just want to notify everyone that you posted this PowerPoint deck or this PDF deck in our handout section, so people can download it, they can peruse it, they can start asking questions in our Q&A. And really, I had a kind of a pointed question at Jeff. I was just curious what Jeff's reaction to that deck was. I'm just curious what your gut reaction is, Jeff.
So super impressive, and the note I made for myself as I was listening to Cody was I wrote devs want a dev, and certainly developers do want to think about like actually let's get things built and tested and out to Gamma and out to production, and I think most devs fully appreciate that those are all things that are part of their job in an environment like this. But ultimately, what they're saying is, we want things to be, we really want to do everything we can to focus on the code, and we would like everything past writing and unit testing that code, make all of those downstream things just as clean, simple, straightforward, and automated, and hopefully kind of foolproof as possible, so that they can really do the fun part of building stuff isn't the let's make awesome deployment pipelines. That's just the vehicle to get your awesome code out to production to keep your customers happy. So anything to me that lets your developers focus on being developers is a good thing.
Oh, that's so well put. Devs want a dev. I love that. I was curious, Jeff, in your I keep using the word travels, but in your experience, what are you seeing from other customers in their journey around CD and reliability? And like, is Snap like as far out in front as I'm perceiving, or what do you think?
I think this is it's very, very close to the leading edge based on what I hear from customers. And customers all will watch this and they'll say, this is great, and this is where we want to get to. And I suspect that the biggest question for them is like, how do we go from kind of our sometimes ramshackle, cobbled together, a little bit of duct tape, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and some scripts and a wizard in the corner. Like, how do we go from there to something that's really clean and structured and reproducible? I'm suspecting that is the question that is probably first and foremost. They want to get there, and the question is, how do we do it, and who can help us?
Cody, what was the hardest part? Like what did your gut tell you? What was the hardest part of that whole stack and crafting it? What was the most difficult for you guys?
Well, I think that the difficult part was what Jeff just stated, which is going from kind of this like world of bespoke pipelines to a world where things are like very cleanly managed and standardized, and we just stamp these things out. And I think the kind of the light bulb moment was realizing like we're not going to get there incrementally, one pipeline at a time. Instead, we need a major technical shift to make that happen. And I would say one thing that really helped us was to kind of charge in this direction where we have a deployment orchestration service that sits in front of Spinnaker. And that's the thing that we rely on to stamp out the pipelines, to trigger the pipelines. All integrations are now flowing through this one service with a clear interface that we control that's very opinionated around the rest of our infrastructure. And the other nice thing about that is, 2 years from now, if we realize, hey, we want to experiment with some different execution engines, we can. We've got that abstraction. So I do think that as quickly as possible, getting a basic decoupling from deployment orchestration from deployment execution is really important. And that's something that really helped us quite a bit.
Do either of you guys have recommendation on the most important skill for the next 2 years that people can invest in? Would it be Kubernetes? Would it be something else? What is your favorite AWS product? I guess is like another way to ask the question. What if we were to give advice to our listeners? What would it be?
Wow, that's a good question. Pretty broad. The thing that I'm seeing taking off very, very quickly is anything serverless. The less that customers have in the way of individual servers to think about and manage and scale, and the more they can say, well, here's code, and we'll let the environment basically manage the hosting, scaling, reliability, and so forth. That's really resonating with customers. So anything that has serverless in the name or the quick description is something that customers are really excited about lately.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And then, I also think in line with that, just being able to take this opinionated view of devs want to dev, like Jeff said, I think essentially that applies to all underlying cloud, computing. Basically, devs don't want to think deeply about like S3 retention policies and DynamoDB, RCUs, and all this kind of stuff. And it turns out that at most tech companies, there are a lot of people who are worried about that. And if you lose sight of one element of this, bad things can happen. And so the more that you can provide some leverage on those problems and have some good visibility, have some good standardization, and just kind of apply like a consistent and rigorous approach to each one of those cloud primitives, I think that ends up paying off in multiples because it removes that cognitive load from lots and lots of people who had it in the back of their minds before.
Well, what a great answer. And so this concept of devs want to dev is a theme that we keep encountering, right? And Jeff coined it. But another way I would articulate it is it's capital DEV lowercase OPS, right? It's DevOps, right? This is very much a tongue-in-cheek question, and you guys have to forgive me, but is DevOps dead?
I don't think so. I think it's pretty central to what we need to do here. Now, can it be automated so that as much of ops is declarative and rule based and nice like thresholds and levels and triggers and alarms that when things don't need to be scaled up, scaled down, replaced, filled over. Like maybe the intent of dev is to reduce the amount of ops.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I've also found that, I've never been on an on-call rotation where we could fully dev away the ops. There's still the need for some human to have to, when things get real, like SSH in and figure out what's going on. And so I think just coming to grips with that, like that should be the bare minimum. Like we want to make that as infrequent as possible. But when it happens, someone's got to be able to rise to the occasion and be that operational hero that you sometimes need in incidents.
Yeah, and one of the things that, and I'm not directly involved in any code or architecture at all inside the company, but I do read some of the interesting reports that come out from the team. A lot of what turns into challenges when you go to microservices is that every service works great, does its thing. When you put them together, and things start to go awry. It's the interactions and the timeouts and the retries and the buffers that each. It's the interaction of the services that often turns into this is where something truly interesting and challenging and sometimes not fully predictable can start popping up because the teams own the services, but not always the interaction between them in the sense of what are the dynamic behaviors that come into play. I see lots of times when we can make things run more smoothly by really interesting, not even changing code, often fine tuning parameters and timeouts and back off models.
So I just have like a big light bulb over my head, Jeff. I just kind of had a gestalt, and so I saw Cody nodding in agreement. And so, Cody, what are some like things that we can do to counteract those challenges? And like the microservice challenge of cooperation and collaboration with other microservices. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jeff really stated it well. These turn into big distributed outages, oftentimes, if you don't have a clear understanding of where the knobs are and where the visibility is and things like that. And one thing that I found to be very helpful is just some coordinated game days around these things. It's better to practice in a safe environment where you can, like drain some nodes in your Kubernetes cluster, see what happens to downstream services, inject some latency, inject some error rates. To do that in like a safe staging environment and see like how do all the services around this one failure point react? Do they scale down very quickly? In which case they're going to have a really bad time when the traffic comes rushing back. Are circuit breakers firing and helping to apply some back pressure? These are all things that are pretty subtle, and there are a lot of different contributing factors here, which is why I find it really helpful to actually orchestrate some experiments around this and try it. And then at least when you do hit these conditions in production, it's not a giant surprise. Like you've seen some form of the problem before.
No, that's an excellent answer, Cody. Along those lines, how much confidence does doing the circuit breaking and having a blue-green deployment and doing these processes, how much confidence does it give to the developers? And are they always reluctant? Are they sort of reluctant? Are they not reluctant at all? Are they all in? Where are they on that spectrum? Do they buy into these processes that you just explained?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I would say that you, like with each technical shift that you want to propagate across the organization, you have to justify it. It can't just be like the platform owner has mandated we shall all do blue-green deployments because people have their day job and they're not there to consume the latest and greatest from us every single hour of the day. So what we found is really important here is to actually be able to make a case. So if we say, hey, we went back, we analyzed all the postmortems from last year, we found if we all shifted to blue-green deployments, that would save 18 hours of Sev1s. And we think that's a shift worth making. Now, we've automated the migration over. Here's how you can consume that. So I think I found that to be a much more practical way of driving big shifts like that, because there's a, you can have some logical discourse around the whole thing, as opposed to just like, thou shalt follow the mandates of the platform team.
Oh, wonderful. I just wanted to remind the audience that we have a Q&A section built into Big Marker, and that we're here to answer your burning platform question, your burning questions. This is a wonderful opportunity to get some really hard questions answered from our two guests. And I just want to remind, and we do have a question from Peter. And Peter is asking, is the Snap deployment infrastructure centralized and scalable to the required demand, or is it distributed in different teams stand up a platform separately? So it's
centralized.
Centralized.
And we found that kind of in keeping with devs want to dev, devs don't want to run their own deployment infrastructure necessarily. It's a lot easier on them if there's a single team who can run that well, and then it's a lot easier for the rest of the company because you've got a single point for observability, for pipeline discovery. You're not trying to discover where all these things are via like links on a wiki page or anything. You just go to one place and only one place, and that's where all the pipelines are defined. So we found just centralizing all that is a simplifier, provided you can keep up with the scaling demands.
So I didn't catch it from the your slide deck, but are you leveraging EKS in your infrastructure? You are. Just kind of a pointed question to you, Jeff. How popular is EKS these days?
I don't have any access to internal numbers, but I hear people talking about it all the time, and we're certainly continuing to innovate, to add new features. It's an incredibly strong way to deploy. I think people like the fact that it is open source, that they can find expertise easily out in the field. So definitely popular.
Thank you. I find, and I'm not sure if others on the call have this experience, but it makes me feel like it's a superpower. You have the superpower that you're developing, and you're getting better and better at every day, and it's just kind of a cool experience. Jeff, I'm looking through the Q&A. I wanted to ask you a particular question about AWS's position on open source today, and it's just kind of an open-ended question. So what is AWS's position on open source today?
Well, let's see. It's something that from the beginnings of AWS has been central to our ability to build things really, really quickly. Like if we go all the way back to the beginnings of S3, I believe we used Tomcat. I know we used Linux inside of S3. When we launched EC2 was based on Zen. And we've always been very, very active contributors to these projects. We haven't always made a big deal about the fact that we're big contributors, but we really, really are. We've got, I've got a list right here, Kubernetes, GraphQL, Java, Rust, Redis, the ROS, the robot operating system. There's actually thousands of different projects that we contribute to. We host thousands of repositories of our own. And one of the things that has worked really well for us, besides open source code and projects, has also been actually open roadmaps, where I think it was either for ECS or EKS was the first team to actually go out and say, we're not going to keep our roadmap inside the org and private. We're going to not just put it online for our customers to see, but give them the opportunity to see, this is what we're working on. This is what we've shipped, and give customers the ability to add new items to that list and to really help us to prioritize. So giving, we have this customer obsession principle at Amazon, and then giving customers not just insight into what we're working on, where we want to go, but helping them to steer that has proven to be a very worthwhile thing. And I've seen multiple other teams adopt the open roadmaps as part of their best practices.
Thank you, Jeff. Just a personal note, as I mentioned, I'm a cloud partner solution architect at Armory, and so I'm working heavily with your AWS colleagues, and the quality of their work is just phenomenal. It really, really is. The customer obsession is so obvious and so evident. I just felt the need to kind of advertise that. I see Cody nodding as well. Have you had that similar experience, Cody?
Oh yeah. We are really lucky to have a great account team for Snap at AWS. That's how we got partnered with Armory in the first place. And I think they're just consistently really valuable advocates for us across everything from like networking, storage, structured data, unstructured data, CDN, just like across the board. They've helped so much in advancing what we're trying to do here.
All great to hear.
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of a challenging question. We got this question from the Q&A, Cody, and maybe challenging is not the right word, but what other solutions did you evaluate besides Spinnaker?
Yeah, we looked at several. Basically, what we did was we had a list of requirements when it came to just pure deployment functionality. So we want a tool that has canary support out of the box. We want a tool that has phase rollout support, blue-green support, etc. And then we had another set of requirements on the deployment targets that we wanted supported out of the box. So that would be things like EKS, EC2, GKE, GCE, Google App Engine. Is like a pretty large set of targets, and then some security and observability requirements. What we did was, with those requirements, we went and compared lots of different options, whether they were open source, homegrown deployment tools, or third-party SaaS offerings. And so, it was everything from kind of the roll your own build scripts and deploy scripts in Jenkins to Spinnaker to like the different cloud provider options. And what we found was that Spinnaker was the one that checked most of the boxes, and the boxes that we weren't able to check immediately by the default support in Spinnaker, we were able to fill those gaps ourselves pretty quickly. And so, it was interesting. It turns out that we didn't know how many deployment systems we truly had at Snap until we went and did that exercise and had to inventory all of them. And then when we did it, we found, each one of these solves like a quarter of the problem that we're out to solve. So, we were really focused on standardizing deployments, to find one tool that could address all these different targets with all of these different functional requirements. And then when we have it, let's really lean in and bet big on it. And that's how we arrived at Spinnaker.
Cody, if I could just jump in with a quick question here. One thing I've noticed that we seem to be pretty good at Amazon is doing these large scale campaigns to when we see something not right and say, we need to clean this up. We need to kind of effectively standardize on one way of doing things. The current way is fragmented, but we have this much better way in the future. Maybe talk about how did you go from we've got all these different systems to we want to get the target of one, and how did you kind of market that internally, and how did you help or force or cajole all these teams to actually get to the point of doing the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that Snap is an interesting culture in that we can't mandate these big technical shifts. If we want people to use the platforms that we build, they have to decide of their own volition because they see the benefits of doing this. And so that meant that we needed to gather a lot of data and lay a lot of groundwork to make a good case for these platforms that we want to build out. So when it came to kind of the larger service mesh architecture that powers most backend services, we started by first gathering a lot of data in terms of like, where are all the load balancers across Snap? What are all the managed VMs? Who's doing what and at what scale? From that, we got kind of a basic inventory of all the production systems, and we began talking to some of those owners saying like, well, where are the problems running all this stuff yourselves? Like, I imagine you have to worry a lot about SSL certificates and, like what happens with load balancer fluctuations and all this kind of stuff. And pretty quickly, we were able to put together a good sort of pitch list. And it wasn't like, we're going to go change everything overnight in the next 1 week. It was more like, we will solve these two problems across the board for all teams at Snap. And then using that inventory, validating that hypothesis with each one of those, saying, hey, if we can solve this for you by the end of the quarter, will you migrate? And what we found was that very concrete requests like that with very clear, like ROI around the migration really helped us out. It made these cases very self-evident. Now, at the same time, once we got the commitment, we still had to actively manage that. there's still the possibility of schedule slips one way or the other, new requirements. So we had to commit actual engineers to make each one of those shifts happen, usually. But the other thing that we saw is that as soon as momentum began to build, there's kind of this, it just pops up a lot in like water cooler conversations. Oh, why are you still using the old thing? Everyone else has moved over to the new thing. And that was kind of like some positive peer pressure in this case, where as soon as you reach, 25%, and it's your most engaged developers, the ones, they're also the ones who will advocate for you most loudly, it kind of creates this momentum on its own. You get a lot of credibility that way, and then just things take off. And then, there's always some work to catch the stragglers and make sure that they're like really motivated to shift over. But yeah, it's definitely not a one size fits all problem. We had to take a lot of different approaches to get there. But as a result, now the vast majority of the Snap backend runs on this mesh platform. The vast majority of Snap systems are deployed via Spinnaker, and it's largely just taking that same kind of practical approach on each one of these problems, and going team by team until we reach that critical mass.
Awesome.
Thank you, Jeff, for asking that question. I was curious about the very same thing. Like, for example, one of Jeff's title is evangelist, chief evangelist, and so I was curious how you evangelized this transformation. And how you approach this digital transformation. We hear about digital transformations, but if for anyone in the audience that wants to, they can go to Cody Powell's LinkedIn, and there's a great blog about the digital transformation in his team, and it's from the Snap blog, and it's one of my favorite new blogs that I've read recently. But just this concept of digital transformation, and I'm gonna be brave, and I'm gonna ask the question to both of you guys. How do you get business to buy in on this massive digital transformation, or is Snap special? Is Snap like a technology company first, and in a business company second, or how did that work, Cody? How did you get the business to agree to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a case where all of these major technical advancements, they have to earn their keep. Like, no one's going to commit 1,000 engineers to do a thing because I say it's good. Like, that's that's putting way too much trust in me and my judgment. So instead, it's around having like a very concrete value proposition on each one of these. So, hey, we can reduce the number of Sev1 incidents by 80% by shifting to X, or we can reduce customer-facing latency by 70% if we all deploy to this one region for like our critical user-facing flows. I found that when you can boil things down to like a very simple give and take like that on one of these shifts, it's a much more concrete conversation that can be understood across the whole organization. So that's what we try and do as much as possible, is just like clarify the outcome, clarify the problem, and just make it as data-driven as possible.
Great advice. That's really great advice, Jeff. I think Cody might have nailed the question, but I was going to kind of ask you. So if I was trying to do a digital transformation at my XYZ company, do you have any advice?
Yeah, so I hear this phrase a lot from upper levels of a lot of our customers and potential customers, and there's almost this sense of sometimes it's like, well, we've fallen behind a bit, or we're kind of like a little bit of an old school company. Digital transformation is like this super modernization, turbocharging, like, wow, if we do a digital transform, we're now like accelerating into the future, and like, yeah, let's get revved up and let's do this. And the challenge is often there's almost like they need to kind of recap evolution in a couple of steps sometimes. Like sometimes dev teams haven't really fully kept pace with all the more modern kinds of ways to build things. So sometimes a lot of it boils down to some really high quality actual like training, and just really making a good investment in your people and saying, okay, maybe we've underinvested a bit in the past, and making sure that our devs are understanding not just the latest in the way of like languages and tech, but the methodologies, and do they fully grasp what Agile means? Do they know what CI/CD is all about? Do they understand how productive they could actually be if they were to adopt all these things? And it's really up to them, the organization, to say, we've got all these great devs. We think you're all awesome. Let us help to educate you to make sure you can help us bring the company forward. So this focus on education and training just seems, the companies I've seen succeed really make it clear to their teams that they're going to make that investment, and that it's not just like, oh, we're going to like replace you with like more modern devs, whatever that might mean, but we're going to just like, we're going to say, okay, we love the fact we have you already. You've got business knowledge. You've done a lot of great work for us already. Let's make sure that we give you the right skills to move forward with us.
No, I love that answer. I am a teacher at my core, at my heart. And so I love that answer. And I noticed, if I'm characterizing correctly, Cody, you talked about process, Jeff talked about people, but we really didn't talk about technology. The people, like, it really isn't a technology problem, is it? It's a people problem. It's a process problem. Would you guys agree with my summary?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's never just like, let's Kubernetes for the sake of Kubernetes. You do that, and like with a deficit of people or process, and you just kind of have a big mess on your hands. So I think it is really good to put the other two first in the service of technology.
Thank you, Cody. So we did get several questions in the Q&A. I'm going to transition back to them, and the first one's for you, Cody, and it's a very good one. And it's now that you've solved many of the reliability problems via tooling, what are the core challenges you're facing today?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting one interesting factor here is that I found that our platforms and our managed solutions, they often can take off in adoption faster than we can scale them and support them. So like, if you want to move everybody into this new like opinionated deployment tooling, you really need to account for the fact that you might solve 2/3 of the deployment scenarios well from day one, but then there's going to be this really long tail of people who want to do custom things based on their own business requirements. And you can't just wish those away. Those are like real people that you have to go support. And that means that there's this giant investment that never really stops in terms of making these deployments just like truly world-class. So for us, like kind of the base case for deployments is around canary rollouts, doing a canary analysis, doing phased rollouts. But there are a lot of people who want these kind of unique factors like, hey, what if I could do my canary rollouts off of client health metrics as opposed to server health metrics? So that kind of opens up this whole new world that we had never thought about. And as soon as we realize this is actually valuable for one service, then we want to standardize that across 1,000 more services. And so basically, these things take on a life of their own really quickly. And it kind of results in a moving target, both for us as platform developers and for customers as the people who ultimately adopt these things and come to write their run books around it and like really depend on these things operationally. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of give and take on both of those, that the day we release it, it's not done. It's like pretty good, and we need to understand that it'll get better over time, but it's going to take investment on the platform provider side, and it's going to take investment on the customer side just to stay up to date and allocate the time for the training. And these things are never like fully done. You never shift back to 100% dev mode. There's still a little bit of time that has to go into just understanding the landscape.
Thank you, Cody. Jeff, I wanted to turn it over to you, but I wanted to make the question messier, if you don't mind. So I was gonna actually kind of broaden it. And so what are the challenges that you're seeing for serverless?
Let's see. Specific challenge, I think customers are thinking, well, how do we fit this into our pipeline model? How do we figure out ways that we can, sometimes developers want to develop locally or offline. So we're seeing some pretty cool things like the serverless framework has been helping out with that. The funny thing is, you would have thought that when serverless came out, that customers would say, well, how could I actually kind of trust that the environment is going to be scalable and reliable and do what it's supposed to? That never, ever, ever has come up once as a question. Like this idea of serverless, like to me, it was like literally like take your code and just kind of like send it up to the cloud. The cloud's like, okay, I got it. I'll take it from here for you. That model caught on so quickly. Like it certainly took me by surprise. I remember when we launched Lambda and thinking, okay, well, this will be kind of a toes in the water thing for a while, and maybe some startups are going to get some experience with it. And after I don't know, a couple of years perhaps, then the enterprises will take it and feel comfortable. But instead, enterprise adoption was really quick, and a lot of interesting enterprise applications turn out to actually not be very busy most of the time, and serverless is a great fit for that. Things that just every so often there's a new document, a new file, a new invoice, a new event to process, and maybe the frequency of that is once every couple of minutes, hours, days even. So having to have some server in the corner that was there, kind of on the off chance that it would have to do something, people did realize that was kind of wasteful, and all the work just to keep that running was not worthwhile. So I don't know. People are just jumping in and saying, "Yep, serverless really." To me, I keep using the same word, focus. It's like we want the devs want to dev. They want to build stuff and get it operational. All the things we talked about today are these devs that want to dev. They want to build things. They want to satisfy the needs of their customers. Everything between typing the code and having it execute in production on behalf of customers, the more we can make that automated, routine, reliable, that's just helping get all this code out to customers more quickly.
What a great answer. Thank you. And I appreciate you answering my messy question, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you. And so Cody, this is another follow-up question from Ben. And I like this question quite a bit as well. And basically what it was there a force function that caused you to go down this path? Was there something that was obvious to everyone that we needed to change? Were there stalwarts? Is that the right word? Was there people that hung back and didn't want to move forward with this new design? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was never a forcing function per se. I think what we had was just this kind of steady accumulation of really bad incidents in the monolith, where we might end up spending 12 hours trying to recover, and essentially like doing a big binary search over all the commits to try and find like what destabilized the monolith. And it turned out to be just so complex and so interwoven in terms of the dependencies that there was never like one particularly bad moment, but it was just a consistent and steady stream of these outages that were really hard to predict in advance, were really hard to come up with anything concrete to prevent them from occurring in the future. And they were impacting this like large and growing customer set. So I think that was an aha moment for a lot of us after we had seen the same thing recur like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, like especially on some of our biggest traffic days, like New Year's Eve. So that definitely got a set of us motivated to go solve this problem and expedite this shift out of the monolith. At the same time, not everyone was bought in from day one, of course, because there are a lot of people who that like they're firmly in the devs want to dev camp, and they basically are like really, really focused on that feature velocity side of things. And, it does require some work to kind of hit pause on that rapid feature development and move over to this new camp where you've got this new infrastructure and now you're a service owner and now you're thinking about availability and you're thinking about, cost efficiency and all this kind of stuff. And so some teams move quickly because they saw that it was really worthwhile. Other teams really required a lot of persuasion. And one thing that we found that helped a lot was, to make this both like a carrot and stick approach, basically saying, hey, if you're still in the monolith by date X, you are now on call for the monolith. We are stepping away from the monolith. good luck with that. And that was a really good motivator, I found.
Oh, thank you, Cody. So Jeff, Cody's answer kind of sparked a bunch of questions for me, but the one I think I'm most intellectually interested in is for you is what is the force function to move to AWS for customers?
The force function. Well, it really is going to depend kind of at what level the customer first approaches us. Clearly, devs look at the array of services and say, "Wow, this is like the ultimate like toy store, right? You've got all these amazing things, and you say, well, I can build this and this and this, and I can take advantage of all this storage and all this compute power and all these really awesome databases and all this ML." But and that's awesome. And as someone who's built a lot of stuff of my own, I can for sure see that as the attraction. When I talk to what kind of executive level customers, quite often it's not some individual service that pulls them in. It's more the recognition. And this gets too abstract and sounds way too enterprisey, but it's actually, they say, what we really grasp is that Amazon and AWS, you really listen to your customers, you understand who your customers are and where they're going, you innovate for them. We don't know exactly which one of your services we really need now or in the future, but we're just going to kind of count on that iteration and that innovation model to solve the right problems for us. So quite often when I talk to our executive customers, they don't care about EC2 or S3 or DynamoDB or machine learning or SQS. It's like, we're going to just jump on board with you because we want you to keep innovating on our behalf. And it's like, okay. And then, and then by the way, what services do you have? It's actually fascinating and not something that I fully realized was happening at first.
Oh, what a wonderful answer, Jeff. I really, really appreciated that. Thank you. We are getting close to the end, and I would be remiss if I didn't do my own plug for our own stuff. And here comes Charles back. Do we have time for me to do a plug, Charles, or do we have to wrap it up?
Yes, you do. Go
okay,
ahead.
Great. Okay, thank you guys. So first of all, I've been personally working on an AWS Quick Start, and for anyone who's not familiar with it, it's a production class infrastructure. So it's a VPC with an EKS cluster and 3 availability zones with an Aurora database, and it's got Spinnaker installing as part of that process. And so that is being quote unquote hard launched tomorrow. So that'll be publicly available and will be searchable, and the SEOs will be able to find it. And it's currently soft launched, and it's available in a GitHub repository. In addition, we have our AWS modernization workshop for anyone that's familiar with AWS and their modernization workshops. They are another artifact that I worked on very heavily and worked with my colleagues from AWS on who are superlative. They're wonderful. And we just had our Spinnaker Summit, and the Spinnaker Summit recap is going to be available. I spoke twice on it. I talked about the quick start. I talked about compliance, and then and I think that's it for the things that I wanted to shill, if you will. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles, and I just wanted to personally thank Jeff and Cody for your time and your energy and your eloquence. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
It was an excellent discussion, guys, and I hate to be the one that has to break it up, but as you mentioned, the time's almost up. I gained some interesting information, especially about, it's not about mandates. It's about building applications that people find beneficial. So I think that's most important. And as Thomas was talking about, if you want more information about Armory and digital transformation, go to armory.io. But now it's time for the awarding of the $25 Amazon gift cards. So our selectees are Peter B., Jack K., Laura G., and Barry P. So you will be receiving an email at the email address that you registered for with this webinar explaining how you receive your gift. So please check that spam folder if you don't receive something quickly. So I want to personally thank Jeff, Cody, and Thomas for an excellent discussion and about the digital transformation and moving forward. Our sponsor, Armory, but also AWS and Snap for participating. and to you, of course, our audience, for taking an hour out of your day to spend it with us. So goodbye for now, and may the fickle finger of fate be kind to you.